Hi, I'm Kieren.
And I'm Riku.
Welcome to Artificially Ever After. For today's episode,
is AI art real art?
Hey everyone, welcome back.
Thanks for tuning in.
Yeah, we're back in our normal space now. So we had a fun interview episode last time, didn't we? And we're back in our podcast studio, just the two of us, nice and chill. Today we've got an episode that's been requested a couple of times by our listeners. And I think we kind of strayed away from it because we covered a similar topic a few episodes ago. It was one of our early episodes, episode number 5. But now we're coming back to AI for generating art and images and creative content.
Yeah, in episode 5 we covered deepfake real problem, which was all about AI methods to generate deepfakes. And in this episode we're still talking about AI image generation, but with the clear difference in the intention behind the creation. So with deepfakes it's more about AI techniques to invoke false information, whereas with AI art generation it's more like AI techniques to make art which is maybe to invoke an emotional response.
Yeah, and it's that difference in what it's trained to do as well, because the deepfake technologies are very much trying to imitate, aren't they, and like recreate what they're seeing. Whereas what we'll get into today is this is kind of a different paradigm where the goal is to create brand new things.
Yeah, in a much more abstract way.
Yeah.
So what kind of kickstarted this, at least in the mainstream media, probably happened about 2 years ago when there was this Colorado State annual art competition, and the winner of that competition used Midjourney, this AI generative tool that we'll cover in just a moment, and they won. And the judges didn't know that tool was used to make the art piece. So it caused this big controversy because obviously the rest of the contestants weren't very happy about it.
Wow. What was the art of?
Well, I don't know if I have the words to describe it, since a picture paints 1,000, but the title of the art piece was called Theatre d'Opera Spatiale. I don't know, it's a French word. I tried my best.
That was a good go.
Thanks.
I have seen this piece. It's very cool, isn't it? Depicts like a few people stood in this kind of big grand building, which has some sense of kind of historical architecture about it, but there's like a big circular window in the middle, which I think is something that you definitely wouldn't see in historical buildings, and that gives it this like futuristic look. It's pretty cool. Yeah,
it's this really cool mix of the past and the future, and it's got like a really nice mix of like darkness and lightness.
Yeah.
I can see why it won.
It kind of reminds me of the visuals of the movie Dune, if anyone has seen that. It's quite I'd definitely recommend Googling it. It's quite a cool image. But yeah, like Riku was saying, this has then started this big discussion and kind of dialogue around this central question of, is AI art real art? And is it kind of creating original pieces, or is it just kind of replicating and copying other artists? So hopefully we're going to do some demystifying today, but hopefully we can kind of clarify that question a little bit, and you can make some decisions of your own as to whether you do think it's kind of original artwork. So do we want to quickly go over the structure of this episode before we get into it?
Yeah. So the first thing we'll cover are the key moments for creative AI. So how long has AI been used for creating artwork? After this, we're going to cover the landscape of the creative tools powered by AI. So looking at the different ways that they can generate art and what kind of tasks they can actually solve in this domain. And after that, the thing we're going to demystify today are these things called diffusion models. So when we cover the landscape of AI tools for creating art, we'll realize that there's this one algorithm called diffusion models, which are completely dominating the game.
And that's allowing them to generate brand new content, isn't it?
Exactly. So after that, we'll have the fun fact. And then in the second half, we're going to spend some time looking at the bias and the ethical concerns of AI for generating artwork.
Of which there are lots on there.
Yeah.
Cool. So let's get into it. Right.
Straight in. Okay.
So as we always do, we look back before we look forward, which I think puts our minds at ease a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, it's the classic, you hear the hype. We mentioned 2 years ago this Colorado State Fair thing and getting scared. But again, AI has been used for generating art for actually a while. So someone called Georg Naes, a German mathematician, physicist, philosopher, was the first person to show that art can be generated by a computer. And this was in 1964.
Wow.
So how long was that? 60 years ago. And the first artworks that AI was generating were these kind of, it's like using simple shapes, but the best way I describe it is kind of like a squarey avalanche. So the way the artwork looks is at the top you have these squares that are kind of ordered regularly. But then as you go down the page, the squares are kind of more and more chaotically ordered. And at the bottom, it just looks like an absolute mess. So you have this really nice gradient of
Yeah, they look
order.
really cool, don't they?
Yeah, it's really cool.
But crucially, because we've obviously clarified previously that AI is a very broad term, but the way that they were being generated is very different to the way that we now see computers generating art. But these were kind of very clear formulas and algorithms that this guy produced himself, weren't they? That kind of replicated very similar types of art.
Yeah, exactly. It's this thing that wasn't necessarily learning. It was more just like pre-computed to create art in a certain way.
So yeah, he was kind of more just getting his computer to do what he wanted it to do, right?
Exactly.
But then in subsequent years, we actually saw lots of different artists, after Georges, who was the first, I guess, to use a computer in that way. I think a lot of artists followed suit and just tried lots of different techniques to get computers to generate art. But from browsing and looking at them online, which maybe I'm not capturing the full essence of the artwork by just looking at it on Google, but they kind of all look the same. But they are good. I'm not saying, I did think they were very creative and quite cool, but they all looked very linear and, kind of like line drawings. Again, I'm not trying to say that in a bad way.
You're a biased algorithm.
Yeah, maybe.
So since then, what's changed your mind?
Well, I don't know if my mind has changed, but since then, there was this kind of major shift around 2015, which, with all our other episodes, we cover this a lot, that at some point in history, we start to see the shift towards deep learning AI, which is trained on masses of information and data, normally scraped from the internet. And again, this is the same for AI and artwork. So there was a big development in 2015 within the AI world, which basically allowed you to take an image and this AI would generate a natural language caption for what was going on in the image. So we already had classification algorithms which could take an image and kind of draw a little square around an object and say, this is a football or this is a tree. But this was kind of a step forward where it would actually describe the scene that was going on. So it could be like, this is a photo of a child kicking a football in front of a tree or something. And this research group in Toronto had the cool idea, and they said, well, if we can go from the image to the text and this kind of natural language, can we do the inverse? So can we take this kind of rich description of a scene and generate an image from it? And it was fascinating how they started out to try and do that, and this kind of unlocked this whole new class of algorithms, which weren't really like anything that we'd seen before, were they? And it was trying to solve this really difficult task. And just, I guess, kind of testament to how hard it was, they did manage to get it working, but the very first generation of these models, so it could only produce a 32 by 32 pixel image, which is very, very low resolution. And they tried, I think one of the first things they tried to get it to generate was an image which showed a green school bus, which I think is quite an interesting prompt, because obviously, it's generating something that is real. So, this model's probably been trained with images of school buses, but it's never seen a green school bus. And it basically just spat out this kind of green blob, which doesn't look very impressive. But since then, this technology has absolutely skyrocketed. There have been major breakthroughs and advancements. And now, well, even a few years later, you've seen massive improvements where you can actually generate very high resolution images of things that look exactly like what you're asking for.
Yeah, haven't you got a favorite AI generated image? The one of the Pope.
Yeah, this is the one that it tricked me. Yeah, this was the Pope in his puffer jacket. Yeah, I think that got a lot of people. But
yeah, I remember you telling me the first time you saw that, you're like, what? What's going on?
Yeah, I think I sent it to my girlfriend, my friends and family. Like, I sent it to everyone. Was like, have you seen this? This is crazy. And it was AI generated. But yeah, that was probably back in 2019 now. But since then, we've seen all sorts.
Yeah, an interesting part of the kind of AI creative tools history is that OpenAI were the ones to have the first advanced AI art tool called DALL-E.
They're doing it all of them, aren't they? ChatGPT, they got there first.
I think you should invest in OpenAI. They supposedly developed this in January of 2021, but it wasn't actually released to the public until a bit later. And because, as usual, when OpenAI kind of say something's possible and like all the other companies go, oh yeah, we should do it as well. What actually happened was that a company called Midjourney were probably the first ones to actually be widely adopted, use basically the same techniques as DALL-E, but their own version of it. So there are some differences between the models, but they released them onto the public in July 2022. And only then did OpenAI decide to release their model DALL-E in November that year. So
nearly a year later.
Yeah, interestingly, the first people to supposedly have made the effective tool were not the first one to release it to the public, and maybe because of the pressure put on them, because obviously, Midjourney is stealing all the customers or something, they decided to release it.
I suppose one good thing to note as well, whilst we're on this, that there are a plethora of companies now that have produced generative AI models, but using this diffusion technique, like we're going to discuss shortly, you need very, very big AI models that consume a lot of data, and it's way more than you would be able to train on your kind of personal computer or laptop if you wanted to get the same quality results that these big models have. So they do kind of have the ability to gatekeep this technology because we can't produce it as individuals.
So following this, so again, Midjourney came out in July 2022. This Colorado big event thing where, someone won using an AI tool was actually Midjourney. So they used Midjourney to win the competition. And whilst there was obviously some criticism, and we'll talk a bit more about this on the ethics later, but the artist claimed to have spent 80 hours using the AI tool. So I actually don't know how much time the other entries took as well. But 80 hours, it's not like they just, typed in the prompts.
Yeah, it's not trivial, is it?
Yeah, they clearly put some effort in there.
Wow.
And yeah, so when the public asked if they thought AI-generated artwork could be considered art, though, 76% of Americans said no.
But what's interesting is that as these models are getting better and better, it is actually just getting so much harder to distinguish and differentiate between what is AI generated and what's human generated, which is the scary part. So some of these new tools now are so convincing. There was this recent survey of over 500 students from Yale University in America, and they could actually only tell the difference between AI generated and human generated content 54% of the time on average. So basically guessing at that point, aren't they?
Wow.
And there was one image, in fact, that 81% of people thought was drawn by a human. And I definitely recommend going and Googling it. It was made using DALL-E 2, which is an OpenAI product. And the prompt was two pigs staring up at the moon, a watercolor painting. And it does look like a human's done it. It looks very kind of thoughtful and
you showed
cute,
me this, and I remember thinking like I really wish this was human generated, and I guess we'll speak a bit more about why that might be later.
Yeah.
But it's really interesting how this study showing 54% of the time, that means 46% of the time they're getting it wrong. So they can't really tell between AI and human art. But despite this, 76 Americans say that the art itself can't be considered art. So there's clearly something that isn't just on the canvas that gets to decide whether it's art or not.
Yeah. But is that, our emotion after the fact, when we're told that it's been generated by AI, do we only then start to kind of appreciate that emotion?
Yeah.
I guess it is if we can't tell just from looking at from the artwork. We clearly have some predisposition towards these tools, don't we?
Yeah. But interestingly, the world's first AI art museum is about to be built in LA to explore creative potential machines. So it's going to be called Dataland, and it's founded by an AI artist called Rafik Anodol to promote ethical AI, and it's going to be using renewable energy sources.
Nice. So there clearly is an appetite for, obviously this guy's biased because he creates it himself, but
true.
If he's getting the funding and it's going to open, I guess people want to see AI art.
Opening in 2025, so just around the corner as well.
Nice.
So hopefully that covers the history of AI tools for art generation. There's a lot there, and we only really touched the surface of it. But moving on to our next segment where we're going to demystify diffusion models.
This impossible task that maybe is the reason I've been putting off this episode for so long.
Yeah, I've known about diffusion models for a long time.
Yeah.
I've wanted to look at them, but the maths always scared me away.
The thing is that, obviously ChatGPT is very cool, but I think AI being able to generate visual content has really captured people's interests, and it is kind of absolutely fascinating. And annoyingly, the maths and the algorithms are equally as confusing and like weird, which is, obviously why they're able to do this incredible task. But these diffusion models are doing something that's kind of so bizarre and abstract that it is quite hard to explain in like logical terms, isn't it? Because it's such an abstract concept.
Yeah, so obviously the maths, as we said, is really hard, but Kieren and I did think for a while, and we think we found a good analogy to explain how diffusion works.
Yeah.
So, I don't know how many of you know the Sahara Desert like the back of your hand, but we're gonna pretend that's where we're gonna set the scene.
We also didn't know, did we? Because we had to Google a map.
Yeah. Okay. So before we go straight into the analogy, I think what's really cool about AI diffusion models is that they can generate just new artwork, and you can say, a picture of the Pope sitting on a horse flying in the Milky Way, and it will do that. And it's quite a mystery how it can do that. And you may already be aware, because it is written on some media outlets and stuff, that AI can take just randomness and turn it into these really meaningful, high resolution photos. So that's the main intuition we're going to start with, is how can an AI start with randomness and end up somewhere meaningful?
And just to clarify that starting point, so it is literally just kind of plucking the image out of thin air almost, isn't it? So it's I think the analogy I had to picture what it's doing, if you've not seen any kind of illustrations of this, it's like if you've kind of got a TV, one of the old school TVs, that's just showing static, and you are kind of tuning that TV, and slowly the picture starts to come in. So you're going from all that noise on that telly, and then you tune it, and you slowly start to see the actual video come in and that information.
Yeah, you're going old school with the analog TV.
Yeah.
Yeah, well, that is what's going on, but it's not quite as scary as that. So we're going to demystify that right now. So we want to understand how you can go from essentially randomness to somewhere meaningful.
Yep.
Okay. So we thought, okay, how can we explain this? Well, it's a bit like starting in the middle of a desert, and you just walk in some direction with the intention of maybe, let's say, going to Cairo or, Morocco or, some place, wherever it may be. It might be a specific village or just a country, whatever. But the idea is that you start in some random point in the desert. How can you end up in Cairo, and you wanted to go to Cairo, okay?
And I think just quickly, the desert section, I think we both had that because there's like nothing in the desert, right? And that was kind of, I suppose the middle of the ocean would work as well, but the idea is that there's no information there. It's just like barren.
Exactly. Yeah, there's nothing there. It's just like what Kieren was saying earlier about when you have that TV and it's tuned on the wrong thing, like those random static things don't mean anything.
You're starting from nothing.
Exactly. Okay, so the first thing we need to realize is that the assumption that you're going from nothing to something is it completely ignoring the training process. So the way these things are trained, it's a bit like, imagine you're going from the middle of a desert to somewhere, but you walk from that somewhere to the middle of the desert many, many times. So if you want to generate images of Cairo, it's a bit like you have walked from many starting points in Cairo to maybe the center of the desert. So this is the first thing we need to demystify, is that, yes, the images are generated randomly, but think of it more like there's a big X in the middle of the desert, and you walk from many places in Cairo to somewhere near that X. So it's not like a completely random spot in the desert. It's actually somewhere random near the X. So that's the first thing to think about, is like when you see in the news and things, generated an image from complete randomness. That is true, but there's
a little bit of something in there.
It's not quite, it's not exactly true. It's completely random around, centered on something, okay? So that's the first thing. So you can think of this as learning the paths. So in the training process, what happens is you start at a random point near the X, and you just keep walking, and every time you take a step, the AI learns whether you're going closer or further from that place where you want to end up. So how does the AI learn to go from this random point that started near this X marks the spot to Cairo? Well, you start at somewhere near X marks the spot, you take a step, and every time you take a step, you teach the AI which direction it should go in. Mm-hmm. And we're in the desert, so you have to remember, like, you might want to do exactly, one step forwards, but, there's wind and you can't really see the floor. It's all sandy.
Yeah.
So the idea is that you're kind of walking a little bit randomly. So yes, you have like a general direction, but the way you're going to walk is a little bit random. And that's why every step you need to have a little bit of a correction. So there's nothing you can do about it. When you're in desert, you can't walk straight. So that's the first thing we need to think about, is these models are kind of randomly, but walking with intention, okay?
Yeah.
And the key idea is that you're using your knowledge. You've done this walk end to end many, many times. So you're kind of learning the in-between despite the randomness of the desert, okay?
So you're just getting very, very good at retracing your steps, aren't you?
Yeah, pretty much, exactly, but also accounting for the randomness.
Yeah.
So that's how you generate an image of Cairo. You've walked from Cairo to the middle of this desert many, many times. So if you want to generate an image of a different place, somewhere in Morocco, you would have to have walked from Morocco to the center of the desert many, many times. That's the key thing we need to clear up here, is when you generate this image out of thin air, a lot of work's been done almost backwards to get to that point.
To know that path, yeah.
Cool. So hopefully that analogy kind of helps you understand that it's not really just generating an image out of thin air, and it's kind of done backwards to train it to go forwards.
Yeah.
So how is it generating new images? This is why the desert's really important, is because firstly, you start at a random place, although it is centered on the X. That's the thing, is we have to remember it's not a completely random spot. It's like, start near that tree, you're always going to start near the tree, right? And different paths give you different images. So you might have memorized how to get from the X to some specific house in Cairo, but because of the randomness in the desert, you can do your best to follow that step back, but you can't control the randomness.
It'll always be different, yeah.
You'll end up at a house, but you might just end up on another side of it. You get a new view, so it's a new image. So the next intuition is, unique journeys, unique images in this desert.
Yeah.
So hopefully that wraps up the first step. How do you get good images from randomness?
Yeah.
So in this analogy, the key part of this is that you have the experience to essentially learn a compass. Every step, as we mentioned before, you're teaching AI which correction should it do in general, despite the randomness. But that compass is literally the most important thing here, is how do you get from a random place to something meaningful? So Kieren, how do you get the compass?
Well, just to ground that analogy before we move on to the compass there, essentially is like your text prompt, right? So that what we'll see in a moment is that you have different kind of prompts to generate images, but most of the time, and what we're talking about here, is you're giving it a text prompt to kind of kick you off in the right direction. So say you might say you want to generate an image of the pyramids. You then get given this kind of pyramid compass that guides you roughly in that direction, but you might get one of the three pyramids, so which one is up to the randomness. But so part of that training process, just actually looking at how these models are trained and the data that they're trained on, they're trained on masses of images. So like Riku was saying, that you've done this route so many times with so many kind of variations of similar images. So just to give some context, most of today's most advanced image generation models are trained on this data set of nearly 6 billion multilingual image and text pairs. So that's the key thing as well here, is that we've got, for each image, we have like a caption basically. Now, a lot of this text data comes from what's called alt text, which is what web developers actually put in the background behind images, so that when you're browsing a website, you don't actually see it most of the time, but it's helpful for kind of accessibility things, or also for like search engines. So many images where you might not actually see it has a caption, there is some text associated with it. So we have this massive data set of images and with text pairs. And when these models are being trained, they're looking at all of these image and captions, and they're trying to link them up. So they're trying to see, what is it in that caption or that, bit of natural language that is associated with that specific image. Maybe there's a few different things within that text, but what it does is over time, it starts to find those kind of different features or words which associate with certain parts of an image. So some examples of that. So say the very first image that this model sees is a picture of a banana. Then the next thing it sees is an apple. What it needs to do is learn some feature, that's what we call a variable, to differentiate those two images, so that next time it can kind of understand the difference between the two. So perhaps you could have an intuition there that one of the features that it learns is a yellowness feature. And obviously, bananas on one side of that, your apples are green or red, so they're on the other side. What then happens if you get a picture of corn? Maybe there's some green in there as well. It's probably a poor example, but let's say it's corn without the leaves, so it's just a yellow bit of corn. Then it might learn a smoothness feature. So that would allow it to differentiate between the banana and the corn. And the banana is very smooth, so that allows it to go on one side. Then maybe you get a school bus, which is yellow as well. Then it might learn some kind of naturalness feature, which differentiates the kind of man-made bus and the banana or something. So you can imagine over the space of 6 billion image and text pairs, it learns a lot of these features. Now, some of them, as we kind of know from analyzing these models, some of them are things like texture and color, so they are things that we as humans can understand, but a lot of them will probably be very weird random features that make no sense to us as humans at all. And I think most of these models now have around 500 of these different features, which maybe doesn't seem like that many, but when you think of all the different combinations, so each point in all the different combinations of those 500 features is like, it's an infinite amount of images that you can generate.
I mean, imagine having to give 500 things to describe everything you know.
Yeah, exactly.
I feel like I'd only give like 10.
Yeah, so and this is partly testament to, why these algorithms are able to generate such a kind of spectrum and diversity of content. Way more than possibly a single human could, is because they've seen this like massive amount of data and have this flexibility to generate all sorts of stuff. And I guess what this is doing, so these text prompts and seeing this combination of the images and the text, when you go to kind of a point in this space with all these 500 features, these compasses, which are kind of guided by the text, are helping you navigate this very big space.
So if we look at the geographical world, we have maybe the longitude and latitude of the Earth. So that you can think of that as this space of just 2 dimensions. So rather than 500 in this, you're on the desert, it's just 2. And the compass will just look at your current point in this 2-dimensional space and go, well, Cairo is this word, but this word Cairo is always in this direction because it has a place in this 2D space. So it's the analogy here is the compass represents this alignment between this text Cairo and the place Cairo in this 2D space.
Yeah, exactly. But I think the reason why it gets so messy and you've got now like 500 features and you're in this really weird high dimensional space with images is because images are so much more rich than text, and you've got often millions of pixels which describe an image. So there's a lot more detail and information to capture in a single image than a sentence, for example.
Cool.
I think we did it. Hopefully it makes sense. So I think all of this is trying to convey this, if you just picture in your head this kind of going from this randomness, this static, and slowly, and they do work in kind of a stepwise process, so it doesn't just happen instantaneously.
With the machine learning, you can also kind of learn to represent the planet in a different way. So, maybe you put all the hot countries on the top left and all the cold ones on the top right. And that's kind of what this thing Kieran's mentioning about the 500 special values. It's learning to represent the world with these 500 values.
Yeah. Cool. So I think that's hopefully giving some intuition around how these very weird, strange new algorithms are working. But interestingly, so one thing to quickly note is that we're talking about these kind of image text pairs where you use a text prompt to kind of guide you out of the desert. And this is called conditioning. So when you actually build these models, this image generation is conditioned upon the text prompt. However, in more recent models, that the generation can be conditioned on other things. So you can actually condition it with another image. So you can do image to image generation. You can also do what's called in-painting and out-painting. So if you have an image, you can select a proportion of it or a section and get it to generate a new section of that image or change what you see. So you're starting to see these new softwares and tools now. I think Adobe was one of the first to do it, where you can use AI text prompts to actually edit images. And I think even the Google Pixel, the latest version of that phone, and Apple are also bringing features where you can do the same. So we'll start to see more and more instances where you can just manipulate photos and videos in all sorts of weird and new ways.
Yeah, think of that manipulation as just a different compass each time. So, image to image is just you start on an image, and depending on what compass you're using, it will just tell the AI to change the current image into a different one step by step.
Yep.
So with the inpainting one, you have an image with something missing, you just get your fill in the blank compass, and it will just tell the AI to just step by step walk through this desert and end up with a picture without a hole in the middle.
Yep. And the outpainting one's really cool as well. That's where if you have, let's say you've got like a square image or something, and it can extend it outside of the frame and the ratio of that image and produce extensions. There's this really cool Instagram page. I can't remember what it's called, but they do. I love it. They basically take screenshots from movies, or they can also do it with video as well, actually. But I think they're doing a little sneaky cheat where they actually do take a screenshot. And anyway, what they do is they take frames from films and they extend it into like portrait mode, so you can view it on your phone, not in landscape, and it looks exactly like that film was being filmed in portrait on like a phone or something. It's really cool. I wish I knew the name of that. I'm sure someone can find it if they search hard enough. But
that's really cool. There's actually a really cool fun fact here, actually. So what people have done now is, so this compass is conditioning, where to take this image, what next step should this image have, right? So there's this famous game called Doom, and some really clever people trained this AI to recognize any frame of the image Doom, and think of every button that the user clicks as the compass. It just tells, which direction should I go next. So they made this game, 15 FPS, so frames per second, so really high performing diffusion model where you can just play a game, but all you're really doing is just starting with image and just with one compass, just playing the whole game.
So when you move the controls on the controller, that's prompting the AI to generate
a new image,
isn't it? Yeah, it's so cool.
Whereas normally these games, have this like 3D world, and you're literally just moving through this constructed 3D world.
Yeah. This
is like producing a 3D world by only doing 2D worlds at a time.
Yeah, it's pretty crazy. Yeah. And the fact that it can do that in like real time is nuts as well. So you sneaked in a fun fact before our fun fact. So
before we do that, should we quickly cover the other generative tools for art? So I'm going to go with the easy one, text generation. So I think art isn't just for images, it's poems and all, stories and things. So ChatGPT and LLMs, we're not going to talk much more about that.
Yeah.
We know that's the thing.
Image generation, obviously we've covered a few. So we said about the DALL-E, the OpenAI one, Midjourney, Stable Diffusion. So Stability AI is this other big company. And then we're also starting to see some text to video models now, which use a similar process, but they kind of do it for multiple frames. So rather than just a static image. So they're still in their infancy, but Sora is OpenAI's big model that's probably the most advanced still. So that's for video generation. Yeah,
and Sora's not out yet. It's just like with DALL-E. They shown the results of Sora, but they haven't released it. And then the open source people made stuff like Sora. So I think Sora might come out soon, but we'll see. We've also got music composition. So obviously, art is music, and OpenAI have got MuseNet.
Stable audio as well. That's another one.
Yeah, and didn't you say YouTube?
Yeah, YouTube are doing something that's in the works where they're looking to release their own audio generator for kind of royalty-free music for creators to use. So there was some big
from like text prompts or
I think so. Yeah, it's not released yet. It's still very hush-hush. But I was reading some articles where creators were a bit concerned about their content being used to train this, which is all the stuff we're going to get into in the second half, isn't it?
So fun fact.
Fun fact. Let's do it. Okay. Fun fact. Who's going first?
I'll go first. So, gone for kind of a new style fun fact. This one's a bit more conceptual rather than like a report of anything. Okay. But I didn't realize that people didn't really know this, which is that pretty much all AI models, and there's one exception that's just come out, which we'll quickly mention, is that AIs can't think longer or shorter depending on the problem. So when you have an LLM and you ask, what's 2 + 2? And it tells you 4. The amount of energy that used is pretty much exactly the same as if you ask that same LLM, like, what is the meaning of life, and explain it to me in 10 steps. As long as the number of words given to LLM are the same, it's this complete same amount of computational time. The one exception is OpenAI have released a new model called GPT, is it O1?
O1, yeah.
But if this idea is still true. All they do with that is they say it can think for longer depending on the problem, but it's just prompting itself again
for
until
longer,
it finds its answer. So.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because that's fundamentally like exactly opposite to how humans work, at least we think. But
yeah, are we just prompting ourselves?
Yeah,
I don't know.
You know, we assume that we think way longer about kind of calculus or some very deep philosophical question than 2 + 2.
Yeah. So yeah, hopefully that's fun.
Yeah. I think I listened to a really interesting podcast with Sam Altman, the CEO of OpenAI, and he was saying that that's, at least for OpenAI, where they want to take their next generation of models, which is obviously what they're trying to do with O1, which is in the direction that you use different computational resources for tougher problems. Okay, my fun fact. Mine's actually related to the topic this time, which is that the highest valued piece of AI generated art that is ever sold using traditional methods, so by auction, because like NFTs and stuff throw it off a bit, but by traditional methods of art sale, was bought in 2018 for $432,000 at a Christie's auction house. So a lot of money. And yeah, people didn't know it was generated by AI.
Oh, really?
So I feel like you'd be a bit shortchanged if you found that out afterwards.
How many prompts?
Who knows? Yeah. But yeah.
Cool. Back to the episode.
Nice.
Yeah, so now we're going to talk about the bias and ethical concerns. And the first question people tend to ask here is, does AI reinforce harmful stereotypes? So what this looks like in this context is something like, say you want to generate some art piece of maybe, a nurse on a flying horse or something unknown. A stereotype will probably be something like, most of the time that AI will probably generate an image of a woman, and we might ask why that's the case. And it's because, again, these models are trained on data. And if you look historically, the ratio between men and women in nursing is about 10% men, 90% women. So we could probably talk about, this question for a long time. But I think the easiest summary is basically, as things change in society, such as our views on gender balance in certain roles, as long as those change, the AI will always need time to catch up. And it's a matter of replacing the data that we no longer think is suitable.
Mm-hmm. But one thing on top of that, so the interesting nuance with AI is that you obviously have the societal biases, but then on top of that, with all these big deep learning models trained on the internet, as we've mentioned previously in other episodes, we then have an additional bias of how people are represented online, don't we? So we know with ChatGPT, for example, it was largely observing Western views, male-centric and younger people, because they're most likely the people to produce and put content onto the internet. So we have these like levels of bias, don't we, that go into them. But that is the same as we've discussed, again, with all of these deep learning models. But it's just, I think maybe it hits home a little bit more with the image generation ones, because you just kind of see it straight away, and it does kind of depict very visually these biases. I think you obviously gave the one of nurses, another one in a study that was if you asked it to generate an image of a cleaner, they were all mainly all women as well, but then all kind of East and South Asian. So yeah, it's very evident in these models, but companies have tried to kind of hard code this out of them, haven't they? But then I think you were saying there's some examples where they went a little bit too far.
Yeah, if you Google's model of generated images, it will be something like generating an image of the Pope, and it will be basically like tens or thousands of images of the Pope, but not a single one of them is white. So historically, we've only ever had white popes. So we can see that they've kind of overcorrected here. So maybe they wanted more diversity, but they've excluded the white pope in that diversity. I wouldn't be
tricked by that image.
Pope
in a puffer jacket, but
yeah. So regardless of this kind of correction or not, there's a recent study showing that 74% of artists say that they believe the current method of using AI to generate art is unethical. So this idea of using prompts to scrape the internet.
And on that point, in the same study, 89% of artists were very worried that copyright laws were outdated for the same reason of just kind of scraping the whole internet. And 38% of artists said that they were worried that using AI will cause them to infringe on other artists' work. So they were kind of worried about plagiarizing each other. So this is a big concern, and I think there's a growing concern that copyright laws are not anywhere where they need to be to kind of account for these generative models. And I think for this reason, with this kind of idea of people worrying about copying each other and the data that's going into it, that same study again, there was 76% say that AI-generated art should not actually be considered art.
Really? And that's coming from the artists themselves?
That was artists and members of the public in this one, yeah.
Right. So that does bring us back to the title of this episode, which is AI art real art?
Yeah.
And Kieren, you had a bit more to say on that, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's a super philosophical question now, because as we hopefully explained from the demystifying section, we are kind of generating something brand new. We obviously have all of this training data that's being used, but the actual creation part is starting from this kind of random noise. So the image that's produced is never exactly something that has been seen in the training data before. So I think you might have to check me on this one, Riku, but I think statistically there could be a possibility of exactly producing something that's been made before, but it's so small
100%, yeah,
that nearly always everything that it's producing is brand new and original content.
Yeah, it's almost like, imagine trying to walk the same path in the desert to the precision of a grain of sand.
Yeah.
Oh,
Whoa,
in sync.
So,
yeah, it's the same, right?
Yeah.
And yes, it's possible physically, but is it ever likely?
Yeah, exactly. So another interesting point on that as well is that the word create, when we're talking about all these different art forms, create actually is derived from the late Middle English word meaning to form out of nothing. So, it's that analogy we were giving, like plucking out of thin air. So obviously I think the part that people are like focused on and concerned about is that it's seeing all of this training data. It's in order to generate something, it does still need to see all of these examples previously. But it does, it poses this question of human artists drawing inspiration from things they've seen, everything they've observed through their life and visually growing up, and then other artists I'm sure they kind of draw from and take inspiration from. So it's a tricky question. I don't think anyone necessarily has the answer, but I do think, as you were saying before as well, that we maybe do have like an instinct to just not want to kind of classify it as art, because it doesn't take that kind of amount of time and the labor and the intention that humans require to produce the same thing, because it's done almost instantly. And I think just to kind of cover that, the Oxford English Dictionary defines art as the expression or application of creative skill and imagination. So I think if we look at the AI now, I think it clearly does have creative skill, because it can take a text prompt and actually produce this brand new thing that is an incredible visualization of what you've asked for in the words. I think it's this imagination part that people get maybe a bit hung up on and is quite unclear, because does that AI, does it have to think and imagine when it creates that image? Possibly not, because it didn't have to think up the training data. It's kind of given all of those examples and the text to describe what it is, and then it generates this new instant almost instantly. Yeah.
So on that point of imagination, what's generally accepted here by the experts and things is they say that these models interpolate. So what that means is that, going back to desert, is that you always take the same number of steps, or you only ever walk within a certain radius of that X that you started with. And maybe we could define imagination as stepping beyond that boundary. Like maybe these AIs, what they're not doing is, say you've only ever gone 100k from that X. They never go further than 100k, whereas humans we're good at actually pushing beyond places we've never seen before.
That is true. Yeah, they're much more constrained in that sense. It's like your fun fact, isn't it, that they're always kind of doing it with the same speed, the same number of steps. So another thing as well is that all of these models, and this is primarily just from a cost point of view from the companies building them, but they are predicated on a bias towards efficiency and speed. So they want to produce these images quickly. They want to kind of infer them with the least amount of energy required, and in the fewest steps as well. So maybe they do lack this kind of thought and intention because they do it so quickly, but does that mean it's not art? It's a tricky question.
It is, and it's kind of more it's not really an AI problem. Again, it's a philosophical problem.
Yeah.
And just as a quick attempt at trying to at least find some grounding on this question would be, I think AI art feels different to human art because there's the authenticity element to it, where people intrinsically value people's effort in creating things, and AI art can just make something that looks incredibly difficult but there was no human that actually did the labor. And I think people find that disconnect quite difficult to relate to. Again, intention is a big part of artwork. So a lot of people find almost a game in trying to figure out the puzzle, like what was the artist thinking?
Yeah.
Finding references and different interpretations of the artwork. But when an AI is generating the artwork, there's no real kind of intention when creating that artwork. You could argue, yes, there's references and things that in the fog of the mix of artworks that it's been pulled from, but it's a very different ball game. So again, I think it's the intention in the artwork that makes it feel differently.
Yeah.
There's no story in the AI art. Like if we say, oh, why does it look like this? You can answer it mechanically, oh, well, it went through these neurons of the network, but there's no real historical stories to the artwork itself. And again, for some people, just the ethics of it is enough to ruin the piece. So it's like, well, if it's theft, I don't like it.
Yeah, exactly. And I think at the highest level of what you were just saying is kind of what I'd thought about before, is that, a lot of people describe art as this form of emotional communication, right? Like you were saying. And we don't think currently that these big AI models can experience emotion. Now, we actually can't say that with any certainty because we don't fully understand exactly how they're working. But from our understanding of our own emotions and how they're being trained, we don't think they can experience emotion. But a quote that I actually just heard really recently, which I like, was Guillermo del Toro, who is a famous film director. He made Pan's Labyrinth and some other ones, if you've heard of his work. But he said that the value in art is not how much it costs or how little effort it requires to make it. It's how much would you risk to be in its presence and the kind of emotion that brought it to you. So he said, is that artist going to make you cry because they lost their kind of son or mother to produce the work, and their emotion was kind of put into that piece? Wow. And he concluded, you'll have to bleep me here, but he said his answer to his own question was fuck no.
Wow.
So yeah.
So he's really playing into the story that led to the artwork, right?
Yeah.
Wow. And I think for me, this is a really simple analogy, but I was actually thinking about this last night. It kept me up at night. And I thought a simple example was like when you get a coffee, maybe go to Costa or something, and I always get so moved by when they do like the foam art thing. Like I always think it's so cool.
Yeah.
And
latte art.
Yeah, latte. Yeah, and I always just think, oh wow, this Bruce is amazing, and it makes me really happy. And then obviously I put the lid on the cup and I never see it again. But that's beside the point. But then I've also had like a machine do the same thing for me, and I almost feel like I look at the art and go, oh, they missed a spot there. You know what I mean? So I don't know if anyone else relates on that point, but I think it's worth thinking about why is it that you get the same outcome, but the means to the outcome change how you perceive it.
Yeah. I mean, luckily none of the machines can do as good of a job yet with the latte art, I think. But yeah,
depends who's doing the art.
True. I think we do and will continue to value that human process. I think these models are already getting so good that they produce some incredible things. Even in art competitions, they're winning. But I think that won't. Maybe that will give us a newfound respect for AI-generated artwork, but I don't think it will ever kind of take away the credit that we give to humans for generating that art.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point.
So I think what most artists, you see the kind of consensus building that people feel that these AIs are going to be used as a tool to assist artists, similar to cameras and photo editing software and paintbrushes, or all these different methods, printers, so all these different tools that are enabling artists to create brand new work. People believe that would be the same for AI. And I know before we just mentioned about how if it's producing it really quickly, the artist actually isn't putting in that much time. Is it still artwork? I think a nice analogy for that, which I was thinking of, is I don't know if you've seen. I saw this really cool video of this artist that they produce this painting from, it's called pendulum paintings, and they literally just hang a bucket of paint from a string from the ceiling, and they start swinging it, and they kind of set it off in a certain direction, and they poke a hole in the bottom, and the paint just streams out, and it creates these amazing line paintings that over time they let it swing for ages, and you get these amazing kind of geometric shapes. Now the artist, I don't want to discredit them too much here, but all they've done is poked a hole in the bottom of a paint can and just shoved it off in a direction. It's the kind of physics and the the tools which are actually making that artwork, they just sit there and watch it produce the art. Then maybe they decide when to stop it. I guess that's one thing, or maybe it's just when the paint runs out. I actually don't know, but the point there is that the tools are actually putting in all the time to produce the art, and the artist, their skill was more in how they use those tools and the kind of creativity in using the physical things in that way. So I think that's what will happen with AI, almost undoubtedly. But
Wow. At least right now, it feels like, at least this is my bias, but it feels like there's something different there, though. Like, for some reason, I see that as more artistic than I don't know, prompt engineering. I guess the analogy's there. You put your art is in the idea for this pendulum, and the art is in the idea of the text prompt. But
I think we just don't like computers, do we? But one other really quick one, I'll do it quickly. But Salvador Dali, who we haven't mentioned, but it was Dali whose name was the inspiration for OpenAI's Dali generation model. He did a similar thing where he fired ink-filled bullets, which for the bullets he actually used snail shells.
Oh, wow.
And he fired them at a canvas, and it was like the splattering of the ink that was the artwork. So similar
Wait,
one.
what happened to the snails?
They were the shells from snails, so I'm hoping they were already dead, and he didn't just go and
Ethically
de-shell
collected.
a load of snails.
Okay.
Maybe he ate the snails.
Oh, nice. Well, that's a double win. Okay, so moving on to our next point about plagiarism and ownership, I actually wanted to start this conversation off about this monkey. So the story starts in 2011. So this British wildlife photographer called David Slater was in Indonesia photographing monkeys, and during a shoot, one of the monkeys, later identified as Naruto, which is a reference to an anime, by the way, picked up David's unattended camera and took many selfies. And if you Google this, they're really good selfies.
I think I've seen these, yeah.
Yeah, they're really cool. You'd probably think they are AI generated right now, but they're actually real. So yes, David claimed copyright over the photograph because asserting that it was his equipment, his image. Mm-hmm. But in 2015, this People for the Ethical Treatment of Animals, so PETA.
PETA.
Yeah, PETA. The famous, filed a lawsuit against David on behalf of Naruto, claiming that the monkey should be declared the owner of the photograph. So anyway, the whole dispute happened, and finally in 2018, so for 7 years, this is going on for, David agreed to donate 25% of all future revenue from the monkey selfie to charities for protecting Naruto and his habitat. And to relate this to the AI space, it's like, well, does whoever own the tool, AI, the generated image, or does whoever own the prompt own the image? It's not so clear. I mean, this, if a monkey takes your camera and takes a photo, apparently it's the monkey's. So.
Yeah. So that I think that's still like a really open-ended question, isn't it, about ownership that people aren't sure about with who's generated the content. The other thing is the kind of copyright infringement with the training data, which I think these lawsuits are much more progressed. But I think there's a massive array of these lawsuits going on at the moment with people so artists and all sorts of individuals who feel that their content and images have been fed to these models and are kind of being replicated. But just last month, a federal judge in America decided to allow key parts of a class action lawsuit that was filed by a group of visual artists and illustrators against the makers of Midjourney and Stability AI as well. And it's kind of gone forward. So this is now the furthest ahead of such lawsuits against these AI companies. And what they're kind of suing them against is the fact that they believe that these tools encourage users to generate images that very closely mimic a given artist's style. And this one is the furthest along the road, so we'll have to see what comes of that. But it's not looking good for the AI companies.
Oh, wow. So on that point, we're seeing more models now starting to cite their outputs. So just quickly going to text, you'll see now on like text models now, a lot of the generated text will have some kind of highlighting of where it pulled that text from. And we're starting to see that as well with the image models, is where it's people trying to figure out where the inspiration came from to generate each image. So that's one side of addressing this. But before that entirely is this idea of every time you use AI for art, or in any case, you should let people know which part of your content that you're posting is AI generated.
Mm-hmm.
There was an example of something like that happening this week, wasn't there?
Yeah, I mean, we've not focused on the dark sides of this technology because we covered a lot of that in the deepfake episode. But this technology is fundamentally different because it can create things that we've never ever seen before, like Donald Trump on a unicorn or something. And in exactly that light, very scarily this month on X, formerly Twitter, Elon Musk actually posted an AI-generated image of Kamala Harris wearing a red communist uniform with the caption, "Can you believe she wears this outfit?" So this technology has facilitated this that has never before been possible. And people that aren't aware of this technology might see that and think, "Oh my God, she's actually wearing that outfit." And then in response to that, there were some ex-users who hit back and posted these generated images of Elon Musk wearing a Nazi uniform. So these crazy images that are being created of like politicians, the leaders of the world, doing things that aren't real. You can imagine how kind of influential that is. So we're not going to go too deep into this, but this is a very concerning side to this technology that as the technology progresses and gets more and more convincing, will become more and more of an issue that we need to start tackling now.
Yeah, because again, the tools for generating art with AI does naturally kind of bleed into the deepfake argument. Wow, we did kind of end on scary stuff there. We started all light and artsy, but
Yeah.
Hopefully that does cover the landscape of how AI image generation works, and especially on the creative side of it.
Yeah. And I'm sure, we'll be coming back to this topic because I think all of this is still quite a big open question. Like, we don't know how we feel about these tools. We don't know how to legislate them. We don't know where they quite fit into art or society. So, we're going to be coming back to these. So stay tuned. But we hope we covered the landscape. We hope we managed to demystify a little bit this really wacky technology of diffusion. But yeah, it's important to know about because, like Riku was saying, scarily, whether we like it or not, we're going to start to see more and more content online being generated this way. And I think it's very good to know, how these models are trained, what information they see, what they're actually doing, is it original or not? So hopefully we explain some of those things today.
Our next episode, we're going to keep going with I know we ended on a dark note, but we're going to keep it lighthearted. We're going to talk about how AI might help us speak with animals.
Amazing.
Very
I'm very
cool.
excited for this one. So yeah,
what animal would you talk to?
I think I need to think a lot harder about that. I mean, octopuses are probably the most intelligent after humans, maybe. So it'd be kind of cool to see what they think of the world.
Really? I think I'd talk to a squirrel.
Oh, I'm not going to ask you why. Maybe go on, why?
I don't know, they're just cute.
Oh, okay.
And I like nuts. They like nuts.
Okay. Blooper. All right. Cool. So thank you very much for listening, and we'll catch you next time.